Ein herzliches Willkommen zu unserem Check-in der Kultur- und Kreativwirtschaft.
Die Leute stehen jetzt nicht vor einem geplatzten Job, die stehen vor null.
Was uns geholfen hat, ist wirklich direkt das Team zu fragen.
Dass wenn man Dinge anschiebt, nicht als erstes immer fragt, was kann ich damit verdienen, sondern was kann ich damit bewirken.
Euer Feedback und eure Fragen, die sind sehr, sehr herzlich willkommen. A wonderful good evening and a very warm welcome to the 7th edition of Culture and Creative Industries Check-in. Great to have you back. Due to the bank holiday this Friday in Berlin, we'll be recording today's session. For the record, today is Wednesday, the 6th of May. Therewith, I'd like to extend a big hello to the future. So to all of you watching the session on its release or after. My name is Simone. I'm a freelance digital strategist, and I have the great pleasure of welcoming you on behalf of Germany's Federal Government's Center of Excellence for the Cultural and Creative Industries. This check-in is actually based in a very, very special week. 75 years ago, on the 8th of May, 1945, the Nazi dictatorship announced its unconditional surrender from actually Berlin-Karlhorst, which is barely 30 minutes away from where I'm sat right now. However, this wasn't just an elite victory and liberation. It laid the foundation of the construction of a European Union as we know it today. This Saturday, on the 9th of May, will celebrate its 70th birthday. It was only 5 years after the end of the war when the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman came up with the idea of Europe. The European states would unite economically, and therewith they would form a community of peace. Looking back, this idea was successful. Never before in our continent's history has been a longer period of peace, lasting for 75 years by now. This is why we are dedicating this week's check-in to Europe. What is the effect of Corona crisis on Europe's cultural and creative industry? What are the various measures, best practices, and remaining gaps to support us, and vice versa? So how can we as a community maybe support Europe's community? Dear Barbara, dear Olaf, dear Philippe, thank you so much for taking time today to share your experiences and expertise with us, despite all the other responsibilities and tasks you must have right now. Before we delve into the topic, and for all the viewers who haven't had the chance to meet you yet, I would like to invite you to briefly introduce yourself. And also I would like to invite you to share, we call it daily hack. So an activity that supported you in this exceptional situation and might be even useful for our community to get inspired too. So in good tradition, I take this virtual introduction ball and I'm gonna throw it right over to you, Olaf.
Okay, thank you very much. So nice to be here in Berlin today, but actually I'm in Bremen. So my name is Olaf Arndt. I'm an economic geographer and I'm head of the Analysis and Scientific Debate at the Federal Government's Center of Excellence for the Cultural and Creative Industries and Vice Director at Prognos. Prognos is one of Europe's oldest economic research company, founded back in 1959 in Basel, Switzerland. And today we are represented by around 180 experts, and for more than 10 years now, we are very familiar with the most diverse structural and economic features of the cultural and creative industries, and we have written numerous studies of the sector. For example, I'm co-author of the 2006 baseline study in Germany on the identification of the common characteristics and the definition of the cultural creative industries for all the policies in Germany. And I was engaged in studies about digital forms of self-marketing in the cultural creative industries and their effects on the social security systems for artists, as well as the role in the economic value chain and innovative potentials. So as a new partner, Prognos hopefully strengthens the Center of Excellence for the cultural and creative industries with analysis, studies, trend analysis and reports. And our aim is to make the industry more visible, to work out its potential and develop solutions through all these studies and work we do. So go to the quick hack from everyday life. I think all the days what to do in case of all the fear and bad mood in the crisis. We see the media are full of previews and 10-point plans on how the world of work will and the world of economy will have changed after Corona. The Corona crisis is like a change turbo because the experiences and the consciousness of many people are currently being changed at record speed. And I ask myself, but what is the best way to react to this uncertainty? Wait like rabbits in the headlights of a car or lapse into blind actionism? So I think the right way is to think about plan B, and it's important to prepare for the reorientation in a self-reflective manner. This includes, first of all, thinking about what is actually important to you when you are in great shape professionally and asking yourself what you are particularly good at. And on this basis, a strategy for the future then can be developed. And I think this applies to yourself, to myself, as well to the entire branches of culture and creative industry. And I hope that we are all together able to look for new ways and solutions in future. So this is my first impression. So
we're going to talk about that. Exactly. Please be invited to throw it. I have the ball, wherever you want to.
We'll throw it to Philippe. Philippe, please.
I catch the ball, and I even caught it. And it's time for me to say guten Tag to everybody and hello. I'm talking from Brussels. Brussels, the capital of Europe. We just finished the lockdown on Monday, so 2 days ago, at least partial lockdown, slow lockdown. Or getting outside the lockdown. My name is Philippe Kern. I'm the managing director of KEA. KEA is a research center that is specialized in cultural and creative industries as well as sport. It was founded now 20 years ago. We consider ourselves as cultural policy designers. So we do a bit like Prognos. We do research and studies, impact assessment. We work also on a lot of European projects, and the reason also we are based in Brussels. So we work around the 27 EU member states, but also internationally. We had an office for 7 years in China, and our idea or our mission, as we see it, is to passionately defend the interests of the cultural sector in policy making, and show how much culture contributes to, in a transversal way, to a varied ways to other policy areas like education, urban planning, economic development, social development, and we would like to see a better account of the power of the industry in terms of skills and competence to, especially at the time of a crisis, to maybe imagine the way out, and we're trying our best through our research to showcase the importance of the sector, which is now which is essentially composed of small companies, individuals that are driven essentially by passion, or close to 2 million enterprises in Europe, 600 billion turnover, and more than 3% of EU GDP. So it's a significant industry, larger than some other more traditional industries, that needs to be better take into account in policy making. And we see our mission is to enable this to happen. And in this respect, we also try to develop networks. And one of the networks we've been developing for the last 3 years out of a European project is the network Be Creative, and I think I will talk about Be Creative a bit later on in the show. But I don't want to take too much of a time, and I hand over the ball to to Barbara.
Barbara, before you catch it, Felipe, do you want to share a daily hack with us too, or shall we put that to later on?
I'll have is that the lockdown gave me the opportunity to go back to my yoga roots, and so I'm practicing yoga. I try at least 4 times a week. I'm not as good as doing every morning, but it was the opportunity to go back into yoga and meditation. So I felt good with this.
Okay, Barbara already has caught the ball. Sorry for interrupting.
Yes, hello. Thanks a lot for organizing this here, and especially also referring to the importance of the EU as a peace project, ending the war. I think it's very important to underline this in this current situation in which we are all in, where it is actually really surprising to see how the borders are closing again and how bilateral agreements are popping up again as to who can travel and who can do this and that. I myself am from Austria, so you will understand. Well, I have been working for the European Commission since the 90s, and now I work in cultural and creative sector policies and CCIs. It's terrible to see what happens to cultural and creative sectors and the theaters being closed, concerts being closed, freelancers not having jobs. So that's really terrible. And we are trying basically to see how the money which has been allocated to different funds can actually also be reserved for cultural and creative sectors, which is a main challenge to do this. And we have also received lots of letters from different European sector networks and also the Parliament to basically try to do this together. Because one last thing, just to remember, the Commission is quite weak on culture in terms of competences, because member states, the competences are not exclusive competences like on trade, for example, but it's member states who have a big role, who have kept for themselves a big role on culture and of health, for example. And here you can see now the limitations of what that actually means. So here we rely a lot also on pressuring together also member states to allocate the necessary money. Well, something lighter, the daily hack you were asking me. The daily hack, basically, it consists of doing something fun with the kids. So since we cannot cook the whole time, we do daily jam sessions. So everybody grabs an instrument and we kind of do kind of jam sessions. So that's great fun.
So I'm going to take the ball from you exactly from the other side. Zack! Back once again. Thank you for the introduction. For you, dearest community, who's joining us, as always, you're going to find updates on political measures, this time particularly for Germany. You can therefore please visit the Excellence Center's website, and you can find the link of the address at the bottom of the screen right now. So I would like actually to look with you on kind of the status quo of Europe's creative industry in this exceptional situation. Olaf, you already mentioned you're part of the Excellence Center research team, I would say it in these terms. And 1.5 weeks ago, you published a paper on the situation of culture and creative community and the economic effects of Corona. Can you give us a very brief overview, because I do know that there are so many interesting details, and you can also gonna read through the paper afterwards. But maybe you can give us a very brief overview on how Europe's creative industry is doing right now from what you find.
Yes, of course. So I give you the hint. You can download all the paper on the homepage. It's just now only in German, but from next week on, hopefully in English for all the people. So first, the general impact of the crisis in Europe, especially in Germany, but in all countries in Europe. The impact of the Corona pandemic differs significantly according to submarkets, to the size of the company, as well as the moment in time in all European states. We observe a particularly vulnerability of those markets that rely on events and shows in order to generate profit. These are especially music, performing arts, so-called first in, last out markets that are being hit hardest by the crisis. As long as health policy measures remain in place, these markets remain out of business. To make matters worse, we have a high number of solo self-employed and freelancers in these markets that lack financial resources and capabilities to receive loans from banks and pay them back. And for larger parts of these employment groups, the crisis has far-reaching consequences for securing their personal livelihood. With a certain time lag, yes?
I just was wondering if you, in your research, were you able to find some measures within the European countries where you said, okay, that really supported the culture and creative industries, and maybe we can learn from?
Yes, of course. Let me do first one more sentence, because it's important, because we have a certain time lag. We observe revenue shortfalls in those markets whose business models are predominantly financed by advertising. Press, broadcasting, regional publishers and providers are the first to feel the crisis. But we also determine turnover losses in bigger companies. And what can we observe all over Europe and in Germany? We have a lot of emergency grants now, and we have a big debate of funding gaps in Germany. So because there's a problem for solo self-employed and freelancers that are excluded from grants. So there's an example from the UK. What we can find there is that we have income support measures for self-employed freelancers. And so everybody who is self-employed can qualify for this, for direct cash grant for 80% of their profits from last year, and this covers all of the costs they have, and also their own income, what is not allowed in Germany, for example. And we have some other examples from all over Europe, in Denmark, in the Netherlands, and also in Swiss, where we find some compensation funds because of all the closure of undertakings, and there up to 80% of the financial loss of artists' income is paid by these grants, if you can say this is a lockdown because of Corona. So these are two very important grants in these emergency aids we can find. But let me say a third interesting way to support. It's not from Europe, but we had a look all over the world, and what I found very interesting is an example from Singapore, because they had the same problem of income loss, and they have a look in future, and they say, okay, let's do some self-employed persons training support scheme. So you are able to get some new earnings. They get, I think, $10 per hour or $600 per week for going to this support scheme and to learn some new thing about entrepreneurship, digital marketing, digital video design. So it's a combination of emergency aid and also a new way to the future. And these are three first impressions what can be done in Europe or other way in all over the world.
Quite interesting. So it's kind of I get paid for learning. I do know that
paid for learning, yes.
Yeah, I do know that there's a fund where you can actually apply to in Germany to get support. Not really paid for learning, but you get a little fund. I think it's 4,000 euros, where you can actually apply for, and then you can invest it in, for example, a coaching. From Singapore to the heart of Europe, as Philippe just mentioned it that wonderfully. Barbara, you're part of the European Commission. I was wondering, actually, how can I imagine right now how is work going on actually in this current situation? Are you also working generally from home office?
Yes, most of us are still working in home office, which of course means that it's a day and night job, as you have experienced probably yourself. Now, concerning the different European actions, which maybe not everybody is aware of, there has been 100 billion euro for the unemployment risk and emergency fund. Then there has been 37 billion euro of funds for the Corona Response Investment Initiative to use money from the structural funds, but that's both of these instruments are via member states, so it's basically done by the member states, not centralized. Then there is a temporary framework for state aid, which actually permits that competition rules are also not as strict, so that member states can support cultural and creative sectors and industries. And then there are different activities also under Creative Europe Horizon. So there are different smaller actions there. And maybe you can also show the website, Konstantin. We have just recently now launched a website called, it's a platform, Creatives Unite. You can, via the contribute button, you can share basically good practice of cultural and creative sectors themselves on Corona initiatives. There's also information about EU responses there. You can search by sector, and you can also enter specific cooperation requests if you would like to cooperate across countries on some kind of Corona response. I mean, just yes, in terms of response, there are like maker spaces which have been 3D printing masks also for hospitals, which also have been sharing already between themselves, different certified ways of actually producing and folding these masks. So that's one of those activities. Then has been the EU Hack the Virus hackathon. So there have been lots of different initiatives, some of them smaller, some of them bigger. You can find them there.
For our community, just that you know, if that was too brief the moment you saw the website, we're going to actually put all the links we're going to mention today, we're going to put them in the description on YouTube. So no worry if that was not long enough. What Olaf just mentioned, and Barbara and Philippe going to mention something as well, you're going to find all those links in the description below. Barbara, one further question, because you already mentioned that is kind of an introduction platform where you can also find further funds, if I got that right. So it's not only that the existing funds gonna get further, for example, Creative Europe, but also there are further new funds which are gonna be listed on the website.
No, yeah, this website is not about funding primarily. It's more about finding solutions to COVID, because the solutions need to be very fast. As I mentioned, these big amounts of funds, they are being distributed via the member states. So it's not that an artist can apply for individual funding to the European Commission. Member states don't like us. They would never permit us to do so. So the only thing that we are authorized to do is to help with networking among different countries, because each country is very, has kept the competence of dealing with culture by itself. So in this sense, concerning funding, I think the first logic would be to see locally what is available. Also in terms of unemployment benefits, etc. Some of this money is co-funded by the EU. Some of this money is not co-funded, but it's not being done centrally by the EU. Otherwise, it's the way the member states distribute these funds.
And maybe a last question in terms of funds, because I do believe that for some it might be maybe not a freelancer like I am, but maybe for some middle-sized organization it might be interesting to think about that. I know that I think it was last year that you actually set up a website where you can find all the different funds for the creative industry in general, because Creative Europe is one of the big ones, or the most known one. This website still exists as far as I know, right? So we're gonna put that in the description as well.
Yes, you can. Yes, exactly. It's on our Europa, it's CCI's EU. And basically here you can find links to different studies, funding opportunities and other resources, also under the different EU programs like Horizon, Creative Europe, media program, etc. So, but this is just the normal funding programs which have their rhythm. It's not an emergency Corona thing, because that is done via the member states.
Okay, got that. Philippe, you just mentioned the different areas you are working in. One is Be Creative, where I want to talk about in a second. Before that, I realized, or I was able to see the collaborative map you actually created. Maybe you can introduce this to us very briefly.
Yeah, the idea of the map was to see how it could be useful actually to the sectors to highlight policy measures taken in different countries and maybe be inspired by some of the measures. So indeed on our website, keynet.eu, you will find this COVID-19 policy measures map, and you are all welcome to participate in the efforts to collect the data. What I'd like to say, we're going to provide an analysis within 2 weeks on actually data we have collected. We actually, there is a form to fill in that simplify the collection material that enables to do quite a rapid analysis of what is happening. I'd like to add also for people that are not familiar with the cultural and creative sector, that it's a sector that's very reliant on public policy. Many sectors are dependent on public grants and specific support system, and therefore it is important to consider the impact of the sanitary crisis on the sector and see what policymakers are providing in order to shield as much as possible the different actors, whether they are working in the public field, whether in the private sector, whether they're freelancers, whether they're individual artists. So they are hit very hard, very, very hard, because for 2 months, essentially, there has not been any revenue for people that are living, especially for live performance, in the cinema sector, in theaters, in music, and so on. So obviously, what is important is in the policy measures is that the response has been quite interesting compared, for instance, to the economic crisis, the financial crisis 2009, is that we found out that 2/3 of the countries in the EU has actually adopted measures that support to more or less extend the cultural and creative industry. So maybe only 1/3 has so far not taken a specific measure. And they are generally kind of overall measures, as was explained by Olaf. And now we're slowly seeing some member states going into the details. Actually, President Macron in France is announcing today a specific measures for the cultural and creative sector in France. Germany has done the same, and this, we expect this to spill over throughout the European Union. What I'd like to say is obviously there's what is happening with COVID-19 is accelerating a process that's already taking place in terms of supporting a new way of accessing culture, essentially through digital distribution, and this is where the industry will need to adapt and consider how to position itself in the post-COVID-19. And we would like to be also helpful in supporting consideration our artists and creative professionals can help politicians to consider the future because of their creative skills, their ability to create solidarity in the community, in addressing specific social cohesion issues. We believe that the artists and creatives can help imagine, as they are creative, can imagine maybe a different future that is more solidarity-based. And we know, as you're mentioning, the war in 1945, we know that Europe is in crucial need of solidarity amongst the nations who share a different culture, different identities, but they are trying to work this, despite those different history and cultural identities, they are trying to work on this beautiful utopia or European project. The thing I wanted to mention also is that obviously the ecosystem is very specific, and the European Union is now thinking of developing some recovery fund, is raising money for recovery funds. The priority sectors are always identified as some kind of essential sector, which includes maybe the automotive industry, the aeronautics, the tourism industry. And we want to make sure that culture and creative sector is being part of those priority industries. And in this respect, what is reassuring is that the sector is much better organized than it was maybe 10, 15 years ago, with initiative from Impala, from On the Move, from Cultural Action Europe, which are actually making the case of the importance of the sector with a view to restart the society, but also restart tourism, restart the economy, and address social issues.
I think
so
yeah.
The sector is much better organized than it was in the past in this respect.
That is actually something what I find quite interesting for the last third of this check-in, that you mentioned the chances we do have right now in the situation. Maybe once again, Felipe, because I was already mentioning Be Creative, which is an international association and network of creative entrepreneurs, indeed worldwide. However, today is our focus on Europe. I actually do believe there are a lot of chances. I'm lucky enough to encounter some, but maybe that would be a good point for us to think about the chances we will hopefully meet as soon as the post-corona time is there. Do you see them, and which one are the ones you can encounter? Maybe that's an open question to all of you.
I just want to say that the pandemic is the first time actually where 3 billion people on the planet Earth were locked down in their home. And through the Be Creative network, we could easily see that cultural creative sector, whether you are in Bombay, in New York, in Paris, in Africa, or in Asia, China, for instance, we are confronted with the same issues, and they all confronted with the same specifics of the industry. And what is nice in the network is that actually this community exists because most of the young people now speak English. They're all networked on the internet. They're using the social media, and they have a way of addressing the issues that is quite interesting, and which make me actually quite optimistic in the way the cultural and creative sector will develop in the future, because of the way cultural and creative entrepreneurs work in a collaborative manner, in a kind of international, with an international conscience, and COVID-19 is maybe a preparation of further, big issues we're going to be faced with, particularly linked to the climate and environmental changes. So this is why I'm thinking that this sector can be very important in addressing, in proposing ways of addressing those important international issues. And we will have to beyond Europe, we'll have to count on those international networks, especially on young people and creative professionals, to actually be seen as a solution and not only as a problem.
Yeah. Barbara, do you have the feeling that, because you already mentioned that for the creative industry, it's not that easy for the Commission to really be visible with everything you are doing right now, and because it is a member state part or sector. Do you have the feeling that in terms of chances that right now for the European Commission that there are some changes which might even last after Corona and are lucky or good to keep?
Yeah, I think actually even before Corona already, we have started to work in a more intertwined way. So basically, sometimes you don't, it's not even clear, is it the industries together with the Commission, together with stakeholders? So it has become much more intertwined, which is also, of course, due to the internet, that it's like that. So I just wanted to say that apart from the network mentioned by Philippe, there are, of course, many other networks also active at the European level. I mean, there is Culture Action Europe, Pearl, the Performing Artists, the European Creative Business Network, European Creative Hubs Network. I mean, there's lots of networks, and they're all doing a great job in, of course, writing letters, bombarding the member states, the Commission, the parliamentarians, basically asking for more money, making their point, explaining how, in what a desperate situation most freelancers and artists and creatives are. So I think they are doing a great job of making this very visible. And Philippe was mentioning the recovery fund, which is right now being negotiated. Yes, the problem is always that money is often taken from somewhere else. So basically, there is the multi-annual framework, the budget for the EU for the next 7 years, which is being negotiated. So, basically, we hope that money from there does not go swallowed up by the recovery fund or something else. So that's always the problem here. But I think the networks are doing a great job. And Commissioner Breton, who was at the Parliament 2 days ago, basically, he made the point talking about 14 ecosystems. And he mentioned very explicitly cultural and creative sectors as being one of those ecosystems which needs specific support. So I think the message is there. The pressure needs to be kept up, that's for sure. So I think that it's a great job that is being done. Concerning, if the chances, I think actually what is true and what has been said before by the colleagues also somehow is that politicians and other people are turning to you people, to the cultural and creative sectors for answers. Because why? Because you can imagine things, you are a bit ahead, you're always ahead actually. You're showing how to cooperate and how to survive in other circumstances, how to use all these these new ways of cooperating without actually meeting. Also in terms of virtual cooperation, there's a lot to be learned. And I think that's basically the chance that a challenge is everybody is streaming because people are confined, they're consuming culture like crazy. The question is, are they really paying for what they are seeing? That's the challenge. But the chance is, of course, that cultural and creative sectors are more visible than ever before because that's what people do at home when they cannot go out. They consume culture.
I would agree. Olaf, I know that in the paper you were mentioning a specific section on the chances. Do you think you could share with us maybe the one chance which inspired you the most?
So it's one chance, as Barbara said, everybody's looking for answers in special topics. So we are searching for answers in sustainability, in Green Deal, in smart cities, in circular economies, and so on. And I think there would be a great chance to combine the solutions of creative industries all over Europe for all those topics, which will be done in the next 7 years. From 21 to 27, there will be a huge amount of funds for all these topics. And I think we should recombine and give possibilities for cross-innovation potentials to all these topics. So we combine all the capabilities of solution giving to all these topics of Europe, like Green Deal, as I said once before. And I think a third point is that we should do something more for some non-technical innovations, where the CCI can give a lot of help, but it's not very, it's always not possible to support all these non-technical innovations. It's in Germany, in all these countries, it's still now only technical innovations. that are funded, and we need more support for the non-technical innovations. I think so.
Maybe we're going to find out that post the crisis, we're going to realize that maybe it's going to merge and we're going to have innovation which also take place in analog space, also then in digital. And we were mentioning all the...
I just wanted to say here that the EU is actually a few steps further, because the new Horizon program is about ecosystems. So basically we do not even do the distinction anymore between technical, non-technical innovation. We talk about ecosystems, basically circular approaches. So you will see in the next Horizon Europe calls for the next 7 years, even now in the calls that are happening already now, and Philippe can tell you because he's also part of one of them. It's already about ecosystems very much, and social innovation and innovation in the broad sense.
That's great to hear.
Philippe, maybe you want to say something about Horizon?
The only thing I have to say that we are getting closer to the end, and I really would like to hear your best practices as we do traditionally. But Philippe, obviously you can answer if I can invite you to do it very brief.
Yeah, no, very briefly, I just said it's also an opportunity maybe for policymakers to review the way they consider cultural policy. We know, I mentioned digital distribution taking a big part now. We know the winners of this crisis. You know, they're big platforms that are not necessarily based in Europe, and the issue of ensuring that there is a diverse offer on those platforms is a key challenge, and maybe now policymakers, whether at national level or city level, which are really driving very often cultural policies, there is a need to think of how to adapt their policies to this new world. In terms of good practices, I was trying to refer to what has been taking place at private level, and I came across initiatives that were interesting. The first is obviously social media campaigns that were organized by theater operators, cinema operators, asking people not to get refunded for their places. So raise awareness on the critical situation of those cultural operators. Then also some collecting management organizations that support temporary solidarity grants for artists or authors, especially in the music field. And then also some broadcasters that decided to increase the airplays of local music in order to divert some performing rights income to local artists rather than to international artists. So these are quickly three measures which I found interesting in ensuring that there was this element of solidarity within the sector to fend off the difficulties raised by this crisis.
I see we definitely should meet again and talk about that further, because I'm aware that there's way more interesting aspects you could tell. For the last round, and we had some best practice made for and by the creative industry already. However, I would like to invite you for a final round to share with us some best practices who might encounter you personally or due to your work, where you would say that it's one of the many examples of the creative community which inspired you. Maybe, Philippe, do you want to start? Because you already mentioned one. You can highlight one once again, briefly. And now maybe you might be muted. We can't hear you.
No, I'm not. It's okay now? Okay. Yeah. So the three, I just mentioned the initiative taken by collective rights management companies to create a solidarity funds. I mentioned the efforts made by broadcasters to showcase more local artists. And then some direct relationship, that exists between cultural operators and the consumer, the public, with a view to avoid refunding some of the tickets. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Barbara, what would be your personal best practice?
Well, I mentioned already before the makers and the 3D mask printing, but instead of, I think it shouldn't be me to tell the good practices, but rather the sector to showcase themselves what great things they are doing, because here it is actually us learning from you people. And there is quite a lot of good practice already on the website that I mentioned under good practice of COVID and the cultural and creative sector. So please put in your good practice, and we would love to learn from you. Thank you.
And Olaf, what about you?
So I have one good practice from the north of Germany, from Hamburg. I find this very interesting. The Emergency Lab program. It brings creative people and companies together to work out on solutions for business challenges due to Corona-Pandemie. So the goals are to support small and medium-sized companies in crisis management with concrete creative solutions by using the innovation potential of the creative professionals. And therefore, the goal is to increase demand for creative services in a period of difficult order situation by all these businesses. And it's free for the SMEs, and it's a new income and a new cooperation for the creative professionals.
Wow. As I mentioned beforehand, if you have the feeling of being overwhelmed of all those examples, no worry about that, because thanks to the Excellence Center's wonderful team, you will find all the links, as I mentioned beforehand, of today's session in the description of YouTube. And for those of you who would like to know even more about your perspective on the crisis and beyond, here are two recommendations. My first is indeed Arta's very informative and easy to understand series, Europe and Corona. It is available in German and French. I learned actually a lot while I was watching it, so I would highly recommend it. And my second recommendation is actually a podcast called Europe After Coronavirus, and hosted by the Open EU debate. And as the name says, the podcast is actually focusing on Europe's future after the crisis, so quite inspiring. Friday next week, we will meet again in our virtual living room, starting as usually at 6 p.m. Till then, as mentioned before, for updates on political measures in Germany, please visit the Excellence Center website. You can find the address at the bottom of the screen right now. A big, big thank you, dear Barbara, dear Olaf, dear Philipp, for your insights, your experiences, and your suggestions. And thank you also, dearest Excellence Center team, for furnishing our virtual living room once again. And I'd like to specifically mention Linda, Charlene, Wiebke, Franziska, who once again did a great job behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, a big thank you also to those amazing tech experts who make all this possible and make the invisible visible. So please make you visible, dearest WeCap team. Hello, Konstantin. Thank you once again for supporting us today. Last but not least, thank you. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for joining us today. We very much look forward to seeing you next Friday. Until then, I hope and we hope that you have a great 8th of May and a lovely weekend. If it's possible, stay at home. Please stay safe. Goodbye. See you soon.
Keep safe. Auf Wiedersehen.
Bye.
Bye.